The steady beep of the heart monitor was the first sound I heard when I opened my eyes. My throat was raw, my chest heavy, and the sterile smell of disinfectant clung to the air. For a few seconds I thought I was still dreaming, but then the sharp ache in my ribs reminded me of reality. I had survived the surgery. Barely. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a story like this one. I blinked at the ceiling lights, adjusting to the glare. The hospital room was quiet, except for the hum of machines. My body felt weaker than ever, but my mind, though foggy, still clung to clarity. I turned my head and saw a familiar figure in the corner. My son, Ethan. He was dressed in his usual pressed shirt and polished shoes, looking more like a banker than the boy who had once ridden tractors with me through cornfields. His wife, Sophie, stood beside him, arms crossed, scrolling through her phone with the ease of someone who had no business in a sick room. "Dad," Ethan said smoothly, his voice rehearsed, polite. "You made it through. That's good. We've handled some things while you were under..." "Handled?" My voice cracked, hoarse from anesthesia. Sophie stepped forward, placing a folder on the rolling tray at my bedside. "You signed the documents we prepared. It was the smart thing to do." "Really, Henry, you'll thank us later." My mind struggled to piece together their words. Signed. I remembered vaguely, before the surgery, when Ethan had pressed papers into my trembling hands, insisting it was routine medical consent. My head had been spinning, my vision blurred. I had scrawled my name just to make the pain stop, to focus on surviving the knife. "What documents?" I rasped. Sophie smiled with the kind of satisfaction that cut deeper than any scalpel. "Power of attorney. It gave Ethan authority to act in your best interests, and given your condition, the first thing he did was sell the farm." Her words dropped like a thunderclap. My farm. The land my father had tilled, the soil my grandfather had bled for, the home where Martha and I had raised Ethan. Gone. "You sold the farm?" I whispered, each word burning. Ethan avoided my eyes, pretending to adjust his watch. "Dad, it's for the best. You couldn't manage it anymore. The place was falling apart, and you've been sick. Sophie found buyers who were willing to take it off your hands quickly. Think of it as progress. That word, tossed so casually, stabbed at my chest. My calloused hands had built that farm from dawn to dusk, season after season. I had broken my back to keep the roof from caving, to pay for Ethan's education, to bury Martha with dignity. And now, in the sterile glow of a hospital room, my own flesh and blood had sold it all, like it was a used car. My breath grew ragged. "Who gave you the right?" "You did," Sophie replied coldly, tapping the folder. "Your signature made it legal." I stared at her, the room spinning. They had tricked me, stolen from me while I lay between life and death. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that for a moment I thought my heart might give out then and there. Ethan finally looked at me, his eyes hardened. "Dad, you've always been a poor farmer. You've held on to that land out of pride. But it's 2025, not 1950. It's time to move on. Sophie and I will take care of you. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word rang in my ears like a curse. I turned my gaze to the window, beyond which the spring sun glowed faintly through street glass. I saw not the sky, but the memory of Martha in the fields, her hair lit gold in the evening light, her laughter carried on the breeze. I thought of the promise I had made her when she was dying. "I'll protect what we built. I'll keep it safe for Ethan." Now Ethan himself had destroyed it, but even as despair clawed at me, something deeper stirred inside. Firefighters call it the second wind, the moment when the smoke chokes you and your body screams to give up. But your training, your instinct, your willpower forces you to push through. I had been tricked, betrayed, robbed, but I was not finished. I would bide my time. I would gather my strength. And one day Ethan and Sophie would learn that the poor old farmer they dismissed still had roots deeper than greed could cut. Long before the hospital betrayal, the seeds of Ethan's contempt were already planted. Looking back, I can trace them to small moments. A rolled eye when I talked about crop rotations, a tight smile when I bragged about a good harvest, a sigh when I wore my old work boots into town. They were little gestures at first, easy enough to dismiss. But like weeds in a field, they multiplied quietly until they strangled out everything I thought we had between us. I remember one Thanksgiving, maybe 5 years ago. The table was full, turkey browned to perfection, stuffing made from Martha's old recipe, pies cooling on the sill. Ethan and Sophie had driven in from the city. He walked in wearing a tailored suit jacket, even though it was a family dinner, his hair slicked back. His shoes shined so bright you could see your reflection. Sophie trailed behind him, her designer handbag slung over her arm like a badge of superiority. "Dad," Ethan said, brushing past me to drop his coat. "Do you still not have Wi-Fi out here?" I chuckled, trying to keep it light. "The old place doesn't need it." "The crops don't care about Wi-Fi, son," Sophie smirked as she set her phone on the table. "That explains a lot," I pretended not to hear. Dinner conversation was worse. I spoke about the new irrigation system I'd rigged, proud of the way I'd stretched $1 to keep the fields alive. Ethan leaned back, sipping wine Sophie had brought, and muttered, "Dad, you really should think about selling all this. Modern farming's about tech and capital, not sweat." "Your father's sweat is what paid for your medical school," Martha snapped from across the table, her eyes fierce even as illness had begun to wear her down. "Don't you forget that, Ethan." He muttered something about times changing and went back to his phone. Sophie placed her hand on his arm, her smile smug, as if she had just won a small battle. Another time, at a town barbecue, I overheard Sophie laughing with some of her friends. "Can you believe Ethan grew up here? On a farm? He's practically a miracle for escaping it." When she saw me standing nearby, she didn't blush or apologize. She just raised an eyebrow, daring me to challenge her. I didn't. For Martha's sake, I swallowed the insult. But the hurt lingered. Ethan's visits grew less frequent. He stopped asking about the crops, stopped showing interest in the farm equipment he once climbed on as a boy. Instead, he spoke about investment portfolios, corporate buyouts, vacations in Europe. The farm, in his eyes, became a relic, something beneath him, a burden he would one day shed like an old coat. One winter night, not long before Martha passed, she and I sat by the fire. She was thin, her illness eating away at her, but her eyes were sharp. "Henry," she whispered, "Ethan's changing." Sophie's voice is in his head, not yours. Be careful, I kissed her hand and said, "He'll remember where he came from. Deep down, he knows." But Martha shook her head sadly. Pride can make a man forget his roots, especially when someone keeps watering that pride with poison. Her words haunted me. After Martha's funeral, Ethan showed up only once before my surgery. He walked the fields briefly, hands in his pockets, shoes sinking into the mud. "Dad," he said, "you should let me handle things. You're not as strong as you used to be. Sophie and I know how to manage money better. You should just relax. Relax." As if letting go of the farm was the same as putting my feet up in a recliner. I told him then, voice firm, "This land is our family. It's in our blood. I promised your mother I'd keep it safe." He only sighed and muttered, "Promises don't pay bills, Dad." That was the last real conversation we had before the surgery. And so when I woke in the hospital bed to learn the farm was gone, I realized this wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the harvest of years of contempt, watered by Sophie's disdain and Ethan's ambition. They thought they had uprooted me. What they didn't know was that the roots ran deeper than they could see. The day of my surgery is blurred in my memory like a foggy morning over the fields. I remember the cold air of the hospital hallway, the squeak of gurney wheels, the fluorescent lights overhead that buzzed like angry insects. I was scared, more scared than I'd ever admit. I'd fought. Storms that leveled barns, faced down droughts that threatened our livelihood, buried the woman I loved. But lying there, weak and broken, heading toward an operating room, I felt smaller than I had in my whole life. Ethan was there that morning, standing tall in his pressed suit, as if he were giving a lecture instead of waiting for his father to be cut open. Sophie clutched a leather folder against her chest, her smile smooth, her tone practiced. She had been rehearsing this moment, I realize now. "Dad," Ethan said gently, though I caught the impatience in his voice, "the doctors need your signature on some consent forms. It's routine. Just sign and they can get you in." I squinted at the pages. The letters swam before my eyes, anesthesia already seeping into my veins, fear clouding my mind. I could barely lift the pen. Sophie slid the papers closer, her manicured finger tapping the line. "Right there, Henry. Just sign. Don't worry about the details. It's all medical. We don't want to waste time." I hesitated. "What's this one?" My voice was weak, rasping. "Standard," she said, her tone syrupy. "We need to authorize decisions if you're under." "It's for your safety." I looked at Ethan. For a moment, I hoped to see the boy I raised, the one who once helped me mend fences and stayed up all night, bottle-feeding calves. But all I saw was a man avoiding my eyes. He shifted his weight, adjusted his cufflinks, and murmured, "Dad, please." "Just sign," the nurse at my bedside frowned, but said nothing. She was young, maybe afraid to challenge a confident woman in heels and a man in a suit. She handed me the pen. My hand shook as I scrawled my name across the lines, each letter sloppy, barely legible. "Good," Sophie said, snapping the folder shut like a trap. "We'll take it from here." At the time, I believed her. My head was swimming, my chest heavy. I thought I had just signed away the right to let doctors save my life. I didn't realize I had just signed something far more precious, my authority over everything I had built. The surgery itself passed in a haze. I remember the cold mask over my face, the sharp smell of antiseptic, the countdown from 10 that ended at 8, then darkness. When I woke, hours later, Ethan was gone. Sophie, too. Only the steady beep of the machines and the ache in my body greeted me. A nurse told me the operation had gone well, but recovery would take weeks. I closed my eyes, relief flooding me. I thought the worst was behind me, but the worst had only begun. 2 days later, Rachel Porter came to see me. She'd been my lawyer for years, a steady presence who had helped with Martha's will and the refinancing of the farm. She sat by my bed, her expression troubled. "Henry," she said carefully, "did you authorize Ethan to act as your power of attorney?" The words barely made sense. "Power of what?" She sighed. "He filed paperwork. Yesterday. Signed by you. It gives him full authority over your financial and legal decisions. He moved quickly, too quickly, and the first thing he did was contact a buyer about the farm." The room spun. I gripped the blanket, my chest tight. That can't be. I didn't. Then the memory hit me. Sophie's manicured finger tapping the line, Ethan's eyes avoiding mine, the pen shaking in my hand. I had signed away everything. Rachel placed her hand gently on mine. "Henry, don't blame yourself. You were under medication, vulnerable. They knew exactly what they were doing." I stared at the ceiling, fury replacing fear. "They tricked me. My own son tricked me." Rachel's jaw tightened. "I'll do everything I can, but if the papers are in order, undoing this won't be simple. We'll need proof. Proof that you weren't in your right mind. Proof that they misled you. Proof." The word struck me like a seed landing in fertile soil. Proof was something I understood. Proof was what farmers dealt in every day. Evidence of the harvest, signs of the weather, the yield that told the truth, no matter how a man spun his words. I vowed in that moment that if Ethan and Sophie thought they had outsmarted me, they hadn't seen the depths of my roots. Later that night, When the room was dark and quiet, I whispered into the silence, "Martha, forgive me. I failed to protect it, but I promise you, they won't win." The machines hummed softly, steady as a heartbeat, and in that rhythm I felt my resolve harden. The letter arrived while I was still in the hospital, propped up in a stiff bed with wires running to my chest. A nurse carried in the envelope, her cheerful smile fading when she read the return address. Hayes and Porter, Real Estate Group. "Mr. Caldwell," she said gently, "this came through the mail for you." "Do you want me to set it aside?" I shook my head. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed and stamped official. "Confirmation of sale," it read at the top. The words blurred as I read them, but the meaning was as clear as daylight. The Caldwell family farm, my farm, had been sold to a development company. The ink on the contract was barely dry. I felt the breath leave my lungs. That farm wasn't just soil and fences. It was my history, my father's sweat, my grandfather's calloused hands, Martha's laughter echoing through the kitchen. Every inch of land carried a story. And now, with one stroke of a pen I hadn't even meant to write, it was gone. The sale price punched me harder than the surgery ever had. They'd sold it for less than half its value. Pennies on the dollar. A quick grab for fast cash. Ethan had told me once that he was financially savvy. No, this wasn't savvy. It was robbery, wrapped in legal paper. I called Rachel Porter as soon as I could. My voice was hoarse, but my anger carried through. "Rachel, it's done. The sale's gone through." She didn't sound surprised. I suspected they'd move quickly. Developers always circle when landowners are vulnerable. "I'm sorry, Henry. The papers gave Ethan authority, and the buyers had no reason to question it." "Is there nothing I can do?" She hesitated. "Not unless we can prove fraud or coercion. But right now, on paper, it looks legal." On paper. Those two words cut deeper than any knife. On paper, I had given my own son permission to sell my legacy. On paper, I was complicit in my own ruin. That night, lying in the hospital bed, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling tiles, each one a blank reminder of how quickly life can strip you bare. Images flooded me. Ethan as a boy riding on my shoulders through the cornfields, Sophie smirking at Thanksgiving as she mocked the farm, Martha standing on the porch watching the sun sink into the land she loved. And now it was all gone, parceled off to strangers who would bulldoze the barns and pave the soil. The next morning, Dr. Samuel Green came in to check my vitals. He glanced at the letter still on the nightstand. "Bad news?" I handed it to him without a word. He read silently, his face tightening. "Henry, I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't plow fields," I muttered. "Sorry doesn't bring back what's lost." He tried to reassure me, but I waved him off. Words couldn't patch this wound. When Ethan and Sophie visited later that afternoon, they walked in as if nothing had happened. Ethan stood tall, his hands in his pockets. Sophie leaned against the wall, her expression cool. "You've seen the letter," Ethan said finally. "Yes," I whispered, my voice shaking with fury. "I've seen it." "It was the right decision," he said calmly. "The farm was outdated. This way you'll have stability. Sophie and I will handle everything." Sophie chimed in, her tone sharp. "You should be grateful, Henry. You were drowning in debt. Ethan saved you from yourself." My chest tightened. That farm was never a burden. It was my life, your mother's life, and you sold it like a used car. Ethan flinched. But Sophie didn't. She crossed her arms. "Progress doesn't wait for sentiment." I closed my eyes, too weary to argue, but inside something hardened. They thought they had beaten me. They thought age and illness had made me weak. But they were wrong. 2 weeks later, when I was discharged, I returned not to my farm but to an empty shell of what had been mine. The barn stood silent, animals gone, fields already being surveyed by men in hard hats and bright vests. A "sold" sign leaned against the fence where Martha once hung flower baskets. I gripped the gatepost, my knees trembling. "I'll find a way," I whispered. "You won't erase me." Neighbors stopped by, shaking their heads, murmuring sympathy. Tom Jenkins, who had farmed the next parcel for 40 years, laid a hand on my shoulder. "Henry, we all saw what you did for this land. What they did to you ain't right. Don't let them win." "I won't," I promised, though at that moment I wasn't sure how. But in my bones, I knew this wasn't the end. Farmers know. Even after a failed season, even after the fields are barren, there's always another planting. You just have to endure the winter. And so I endured, quietly, patiently, but not passively, because while Ethan and Sophie believed they had stripped me bare, they hadn't seen the roots buried deep beneath the soil, roots they could never touch. The first week back from the hospital, I tried to distract myself with simple things. I cleaned Marion's old china cabinet, dusted off picture frames, and swept the porch where she used to sit on warm summer evenings. But every quiet task was a reminder of what I no longer had. The farm wasn't mine anymore. The fields that had been my life's work were gone, sold by my own blood. At night, I sat alone in the living room, the glow of my old desktop computer flickering against the walls. That's when I saw it, Sophie's social media posts. There she was, grinning in oversized sunglasses, a champagne flute in hand, reclining on a yacht off the coast of Florida. The caption read, "Finally reaping the rewards of hard work. Number luxury life. Number moving up." 2 days later, another post, Ethan in a linen shirt, his arm around Sophie as they posed outside a luxury resort in the Bahamas. The caption stung worse than the photo. "Building a future worth living." Some people cling to the past. We're embracing progress. Progress, that word again. I clicked through more photos, my stomach turning. Designer shopping bags in New York. Dinners at restaurants where one meal probably cost more than a week's worth of feed. Sophie flashing diamond jewelry. Ethan raising toasts with cocktails under golden chandeliers. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. That money wasn't theirs. It was mine. Martha's. Generations of Caldwells who had poured sweat into the soil. They were spending it like it grew on trees, flaunting it, even mocking me with their captions. The worst came a week later. Sophie posted a photo of herself lounging by a hotel pool, cocktail in hand, Ethan grinning beside her. The caption read, "Grateful to leave behind small-town drama. Some people just don't know when to let go." The comments beneath were full of her friends praising their success, calling Ethan brilliant for getting out of the dirt. I felt my fists clench. None of them knew the truth, that Ethan hadn't earned a cent of what they were flaunting. He had stolen it, and Sophie had orchestrated it. I didn't reply, I didn't post, but I printed every one of those photos, slid them into a folder, and marked the dates. Because lies might glitter for a season, but the truth always outlasts them. Meanwhile, my own life was a stark contrast. My body ached from the surgery. Simple chores left me winded. I had to rely on neighbors. Tom Jenkins brought groceries. Clara Jenkins dropped off casseroles. Their kindness kept me afloat, while Ethan spent my legacy on beachfront suites. One evening, Tom sat with me on the porch. He leaned back in the chair, his face etched with sympathy. "Henry, I've seen a lot of things in my years, but I've never seen a son turn his back on his father like this. And Sophie? She's poison," I nodded slowly. "They think they've won." Tom spat into the dirt. "Only if you let him." I said nothing, but inside, something was stirring. The following week, Rachel Porter visited. She laid more documents on my kitchen table, her eyes apologetic. "Henry, I hate to say it, but Ethan and Sophie structured the sale tightly. They made sure the funds went into accounts you can't access." I let out a bitter laugh. "They think I'm finished." Rachel tilted her head. "Are you?" I looked out the window past the dying flower beds, past the fields now marked with surveyor flags. "No," I said quietly, "not by a long shot." Later that night, As I scrolled through Sophie's latest photos, her laughing at a gala, Ethan holding her close, both dressed in black tie elegance, I felt something settle inside me. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead for scraps of what was mine. I was going to make them choke on their lies. But I knew I couldn't rush. Farmers understand timing. You don't plant in frozen ground, and you don't harvest too soon. I would wait. I would watch. I would collect every lie they posted, every boast they made, every dollar they flaunted. And when the moment was right, I would reveal the truth. Because what Sophie and Ethan had forgotten is that roots run deep, and the deeper they run, the harder they are to rip out. I had been holding my tongue for weeks, swallowing the bitterness like poison, but when Sophie's latest post went up, a photo of her standing in front of a luxury condo tower with the caption, "Finally living the life we deserve," something in me snapped. The "we" in that sentence wasn't built by her manicured hands or Ethan's degrees. It was built by the dirt under my fingernails, the sweat dripping from my brow, the years of sacrifice Martha and I made to keep food on the table and send Ethan to college. So I called him. The phone rang longer than it should have before he finally answered. His voice was calm, rehearsed, almost annoyed. "Dad, everything okay?" "No, Ethan," I said flatly. "Nothing is okay. You sold the farm, my farm, and now you're spending the money like it grew out of thin air." He sighed, a sound that carried more irritation than guilt. "Dad, we've been through this. You weren't capable of managing it anymore. Sophie and I stepped in. We did what had to be done." "What had to be done?" My voice cracked, fury rising in my chest. "That land wasn't just dirt. It was your mother's memory, your grandfather's blood, my life's work, and you sold it without even letting me get out of a hospital bed." His tone grew sharper, colder. "Dad, you're not thinking clearly. You've been through surgery. You're emotional. Sophie warned me this might happen. She said you'd cling to the past instead of facing reality." I clenched the phone until my knuckles whitened. "Don't you dare tell me what reality is." "I lived it. Every dawn, every harvest, every debt paid with my back and my hands. Reality is what I built, so you could walk away in polished shoes." There was silence, and for a moment I thought maybe I had broken through. But then Ethan spoke, voice clipped. "You're confused, Dad. You're mixing up memory with responsibility. The truth is, you couldn't manage anymore. You should be grateful Sophie and I took charge before you made a real mess." Grateful. That word again, like a knife twisting deeper every time he used it. "I'm not confused," I said, my voice shaking but steady. "I know exactly what you did. You stole from me. And you think if you say I'm too old, too weak, too broken, people will believe you? But I remember, Ethan. I remember everything." He chuckled bitterly. "Dad, listen to yourself. You sound paranoid. You're starting to sound like someone who can't tell the difference between what's good for him and what isn't." That was Sophie speaking through him. I could hear her fingerprints on every word. The legal phrasing slipped into casual conversation. Paranoid. Incapable. Confused. Those weren't his words. They were hers. I lowered my voice. "Son, one day you'll understand what it means to betray blood. And when that day comes, you'll wish you'd chosen differently." He hesitated, his voice softening for just a breath. "Dad." But then Sophie's voice cut faintly through the background, sharp and insistent. Whatever she said, it made Ethan's tone snap back to ice. "I have to go." "Rest, Dad. We'll talk when you're calmer." The line went dead. I sat in the silence, the old landline still pressed against my ear. Gaslight. That's what Sophie was doing. Making Ethan repeat her words until I began to question myself. But I wasn't crazy. I wasn't confused. I was grieving, yes, but grief doesn't erase memory. If anything, it sharpens it. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out a small digital recorder I hadn't used in years. Farmers don't forget tricks. I'd used it once to capture a seed salesman who tried to cheat me. I set it on the table, pressed record, and spoke clearly. Henry Caldwell, April 12th, 2025. Ethan called today. Tried to convince me I'm confused, that I don't understand. But I do. I understand perfectly. They sold my farm, and I will not let it stand. I stopped the recording, slipped it into a folder with the printed photos of Sophie's vacations, Ethan's boasts, the letter confirming the sale. Piece by piece, I was building a record, not of confusion, but of truth. Later that evening, Clara Jenkins knocked on my door, a warm casserole in her hands. She looked at me closely, her brow furrowed. "Henry, you look tired." "Have you spoken to Ethan?" I forced a bitter smile. "Yes, he says I should be grateful." Her eyes narrowed. "Grateful? For what? Selling your birthright?" I nodded. "They're trying to make me doubt myself, Clara. But I won't let them. I know what they're doing. And I'm writing it all down." She squeezed my hand. "Good. Because when the time comes, this town will stand with you. Don't think for a second you're alone." That night, I sat by the window, staring out at the dark horizon where my fields used to be. My body still weak, my heart still heavy, but my mind sharper than ever. They wanted me to believe I was confused, to doubt my own memories, but farmers live by memory. The memory of seasons, of rain, of drought, of lessons passed down, and I remembered too well to be fooled. They thought they'd broken me. But in trying to make me doubt myself, they had awakened something stronger. Resolve. For weeks, I let Ethan and Sophie believe their words had stuck, that I was just an old man shuffling around an empty house, confused and broken. I let them flaunt their vacations, let them sneer in captions about leaving behind the dirt, let them believe they had stripped me of every root I had. But what they never understood, what Sophie never even imagined, was that I had roots they couldn't see. I wasn't just a farmer. Back in the early 2000s, when droughts nearly broke us, I started tinkering with irrigation systems. I built crude prototypes in the barn, fashioned from scrap metal, hoses, and stubborn imagination. One of those systems caught the eye of an agri-tech startup. They asked me to consult, then offered me a small percentage when they licensed the design. I didn't talk about it much. Martha knew, of course, but even she didn't realize how far it had grown. Year after year, that company expanded. They rolled out precision planting systems, soil sensors, drones that mapped fields. And because I'd kept every share they gave me, my stake quietly multiplied. While Ethan and Sophie saw me as a poor old farmer, I had quietly become the majority shareholder of a multi-million-dollar agricultural technology firm. I wasn't rich in cash lying around in drawers, but in ownership, in influence, I was far more powerful than they ever knew. The first person I revealed it to was Rachel Porter. I invited her to my house, clearing the kitchen table so I could lay everything out. She sipped coffee as I opened a dusty lockbox, pulling out binders of stock certificates, dividend statements, and board reports. Her eyes widened. "Henry, this is substantial. Why didn't you ever mention it before?" "Because I didn't need to," I said simply. "The farm was enough for me. But now? Now it's time." Rachel leafed through the papers, her lawyer's eye scanning quickly. "You own controlling interest, Henry. You're not just a shareholder. You're the company?" I nodded. "And that company is the very one contracted to oversee development on my land. Ethan and Sophie think they sold the farm to strangers. In truth, they sold it to me." Her jaw tightened into a smile. "Then we have them exactly where we want them." The next ally I brought in was Victor Hayes. My old financial advisor. He had known about the company, though even he hadn't realized how much my stake had grown. When I showed him the current valuation, he let out a low whistle. "Henry, you've been sitting on a gold mine." "No wonder Sophie thought you were just a farmer. You never touched the money, never flaunted it." "Money isn't what mattered," I said. "The land mattered. Martha mattered. But now I need to use this, not for me, but for her memory, for our legacy." Victor leaned forward. "So what's your plan?" I told him plainly. Let them think they've won. Let them brag to their friends, strut at their galas. And then, when the whole town is watching, when their pride is swollen, I'll show them who really owns what. Not quietly, not behind closed doors. Publicly, Victor chuckled, shaking his head. I never thought I'd see the day Henry Caldwell played chess like this. But I like it. That night, I sat alone with Martha's photo on the mantel. I didn't tell you everything, I whispered. You always trusted me to keep us safe, even when times were hard. Well, love, now I'm going to use what I built to protect what you cherished. The next morning, I began gathering not just papers, but people. I called Tom Jenkins, told him to keep an ear out in town. I asked Clara Jenkins to jot down every cruel comment she overheard Sophie making. And slowly, the story began to weave itself. Proof of neglect, proof of betrayal, proof of arrogance. Combined with my hidden empire, it was more than enough to bury them. The beauty of it all was that Sophie didn't suspect a thing. In her mind, she had already won. She saw me as broken, beaten, a man too old to matter. She didn't realize I had been preparing a field all along, and the harvest was coming. When you live in the same place for nearly 70 years, people notice more than you realize. They see you in the fields before dawn, hear the hum of your tractor long after sunset. They see the way you carry your wife into the house after a fall, or the way you show up at church even when your back is bent from work. Neighbors don't always speak it aloud, but they remember, and in times of trouble they choose which truths to bring forward. That was what I discovered in the weeks after revealing my secret to Rachel and Victor. I wasn't fighting alone. Quietly, the people around me began to offer pieces of a larger story. Not of a poor old farmer too broken to manage his affairs, but of a man who had carried his family and his land with dignity while his son looked away. The first to come forward was Tom Jenkins. He knocked on my door one evening, his weathered hat in hand, and laid a notebook on my kitchen table. I started writing things down years ago, he admitted. Couldn't stand how Ethan treated you. Dates when Marion was in the hospital and you were there every day. Dates when you called Ethan, begging him to visit. Times when Sophie mocked you at town meetings. I didn't think it'd ever be useful, but now... He pushed the notebook toward me. Now it might save you. I turned the pages slowly, my chest tightening. His neat handwriting recorded what I had lived. March 2018. Marion fell. Henry carried her to the truck. Ethan absent. April 2019. Henry called Ethan 6 times during Marion's hospital stay. No visits. Line after line. Proof of absence. Proof of neglect. You've been carrying this for me all along, I said quietly. Tom shrugged. Neighbors look out for each other. Sophie can talk big in courtrooms, but she can't erase what we've all seen. A week later, Clara Jenkins stopped by. She had overheard Sophie in the grocery store bragging to a friend that she and Ethan had finally pulled Henry out of the dirt and put the farm to better use. Clara's eyes burned with anger as she repeated the words. I'll swear it under oath if I have to, she promised. Soon after, letters began arriving. Mrs. Dalton, who lived 2 houses down, wrote a statement about how she'd seen me leaving at dawn and returning at midnight during Marion's decline, while Ethan's car never appeared once. The town mailman, Mr. Foster, confirmed how often he'd delivered medical supplies to my doorstep, always signed by me. Even Pastor Reynolds, who had officiated Martha's funeral, offered to testify that Ethan hadn't even spoken to me afterward, too busy taking Sophie on vacation. I sat at the table one night with Rachel, spreading the testimonies across the wood grain like a quilt stitched from memory. She tapped her pen against one affidavit and said, Henry, this isn't just support. This is a wall of witnesses. If they try to push a guardianship case, they'll be the ones on trial, not you. Victor, sitting across from us, leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile. And when we combine this with your ownership in the development company, Sophie won't see it coming. You've got community, capital, and truth on your side." Hearing those words, I felt something loosen in my chest. For so long I had been carrying grief like a stone in my pocket, heavy and unrelenting. But now that grief was being reshaped into something harder. Not a stone, but a blade. Still, there were nights when doubt crept in. I would sit by the window, staring at the empty fields, wondering if I was strong enough to follow this through. The image of Ethan as a boy would haunt me, his small hand in mine, his laughter echoing as we rode the tractor. How had that boy become this man who lied, who stole, who mocked? Was there anything left of the son I once knew? But then I would remember Sophie's smirk, the way she had called me sentimental, the way Ethan had parroted her words about my confusion, and the doubt hardened back into resolve. One afternoon, Mayor Lewis Carter invited me to his office. He was a stocky man with a graying mustache, and the kind of handshake that said he'd worked with his hands once, too. "Henry," he said, "I've been hearing things. Folks are upset about the farm sale. They're calling it a disgrace. If you want the town's support, you'll have it." "Would you stand with me when the time comes?" I asked. He looked me square in the eyes. "I will." Walking out of his office, I realized something. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It wasn't just about the land or the money. It was about truth, about a community tired of watching greed trample decency. And I had an army now, not of soldiers, but of neighbors, friends, and quiet witnesses whose memories would outlast any of Sophie's legal jargon. They thought they had buried me, but they forgot. Farmers know how to grow something, even from dirt, and what was growing now was justice. Word spread through town like wildfire. Ethan and Sophie Caldwell had sold the farm. The story took on a life of its own, twisted and polished by Sophie's tongue. By the time it reached the courthouse steps and the cafe counter, she had transformed betrayal into vision. "Ethan's a pioneer," she told anyone who'd listen. "He rescued his father from a failing farm and opened the door to progress." This town needs to grow, and Ethan had the courage to make it happen. Her friends in the County Bar Association nodded along, repeating her words. Ethan, meanwhile, leaned into the role she'd written for him. He spoke at Chamber of Commerce luncheons, dropping phrases like sustainable growth and revitalizing rural spaces. He was photographed shaking hands with developers, Sophie at his side in tailored dresses, both of them gleaming like they belonged on a magazine cover. And people believed them, or at least some did. That was the dangerous thing about a well-told lie. I stayed quiet. Outwardly, I looked like a tired old man recovering from surgery, puttering around in worn boots, his head bowed. That was how I wanted them to see me. Let Sophie think her campaign was working. Let Ethan think the town admired him. Let them both think I was too broken to stand in their way. Behind the scenes, I was planting my own seeds. Rachel Porter drafted affidavits and organized the testimony neighbors had provided. Victor Hayes updated me daily on the financial structure of my company, laying out the exact contracts Sophie had overlooked in her rush to sell. And Mayor Carter whispered to me over coffee, "Henry, when you're ready to speak, I'll make sure the whole town is listening." I was ready, but timing mattered. The perfect moment came when Sophie announced, through glossy invitations, a town hall meeting to celebrate Caldwell progress. She had secured the local auditorium, arranged catering, and invited county officials. It was a spectacle, their victory lap. When the flyer landed in my mailbox, I felt a slow smile spread across my face. They were setting the stage for me. All I had to do was show up with the truth. In the days leading up to the event, I prepared. Rachel and I combed through every document. We highlighted the clauses proving I still had final authority over development, thanks to my controlling stake in the company. We organized the timeline of Ethan's absence, Sophie's arrogance, the neighbor's testimony. Victor designed visuals, simple charts, photos, even Sophie's social media posts blown up for display. "If they can flaunt it online," he said, they can face it in person. I rehearsed my words late into the night, pacing the living room with Martha's photo propped on the mantel. I spoke to her as though she were still there, telling her what I planned to say, how I planned to honor her memory while exposing our son's betrayal. Sometimes my voice cracked, but other times I felt a strength rise up from deep inside me, a strength I hadn't known I still carried. On the morning of the town hall, I dressed in my best suit, the one I wore to Martha's funeral. It wasn't expensive, but it was clean, pressed, and dignified. I tucked the recorder into my pocket, not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me that I had chosen to fight back from the very first phone call. As I looked in the mirror before leaving, I whispered, "Today, Martha, they learn who I am. Not a poor old farmer, not a confused old man, but your husband, still standing." The auditorium was already buzzing when I arrived. Ethan stood near the stage, smiling stiffly as he shook hands. Sophie glided from guest to guest, her heels clicking, her words sweet as honey. I saw the way people's eyes followed her, impressed by her poise. When she spotted me, her smile faltered for just a moment. Then she plastered it back on. "Henry, you came. That's wonderful. You'll finally see what progress looks like." I nodded slowly. "Yes, Sophie." I came to see she smirked, misreading me entirely. The meeting began with speeches. Sophie spoke first, weaving a tale of sacrifice and modern vision. Ethan followed, reciting lines she'd clearly written for him. The audience applauded politely, some even nodding in agreement. I could see Ethan puff up with pride, believing he had truly convinced them. And then Mayor Carter took the podium. His voice carried with authority as he said, "We've heard about progress tonight, but progress means nothing without truth, and truth must always come from the people who built this land. I believe Henry Caldwell has something to share." The room fell silent as he gestured for me to come forward. I felt every eye on me, some expectant, some skeptical, some pitying. Ethan's face blanched. Sophie's eyes narrowed. I walked slowly to the front, each step deliberate. When I reached the microphone, I paused, letting the silence settle. Then I spoke. "My name is Henry Caldwell. Some of you know me as a farmer. Some of you may have heard that I'm too old, too broken, too confused to manage my own life. Tonight, I'm here to tell you the truth." Sophie shifted uncomfortably. Ethan stared at the floor. I leaned in, my voice steady. "They thought they had buried me, but they forgot. I've spent my whole life planting seeds, and tonight I've come to harvest." The silence in the auditorium was heavy as I stepped to the podium. Sophie's perfume still lingered in the air from where she'd stood moments before, her words about progress still echoing. Ethan shifted nervously in his chair, his smile stiff, his hands clenching his knees. I looked out over the crowd. These were my neighbors, my community. They had seen me on tractors before dawn, seen Martha and me selling produce at the market, seen our family weather storms, both literal and otherwise, and they had also seen Ethan's absence. "My name is Henry Caldwell," I began, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "You all know me as a farmer. You may have heard lately that I'm too old, too weak, or too confused to manage my affairs. Tonight, I'm here to tell you the truth." I reached into the folder Victor had prepared and lifted out the first page, the confirmation of sale. I held it high for everyone to see. While I was in a hospital bed, recovering from surgery, my son and his wife used documents I signed under anesthesia to sell our family farm. They claimed it was for my good. But it was not. Gasps rippled through the room. Sophie sat taller, her chin defiant, her eyes locked on me as if she could burn a hole through my forehead. "They told you it was progress. They told you it was vision. But what they sold wasn't just land. It was our history. It was the soil my grandfather plowed with his bare hands, the fields my father sweated over, the home where Martha and I raised our son. They sold it for pennies, and then they spent the money on yachts, vacations, and champagne." I gestured to the projector screen as Victor flipped it on. Images of Sophie's social media posts filled the wall. Her in oversized sunglasses with captions like #luxurylife, Ethan raising glasses at a gala, Sophie mocking small-town drama. Murmurs swept the audience. I saw the disgust on familiar faces. "This is what they call progress," I said, pointing to the screen, abandoning responsibility, mocking the community that raised them, spending stolen money while pretending it was earned. Ethan shot up, his face red. "Dad, stop this!" "Sit down, Ethan," Mayor Carter barked from his seat. "You'll have your turn." The room stilled again. I let the silence settle before pulling out a second folder, thicker, heavier. But here's what Sophie didn't tell you. They didn't sell the farm to strangers. They sold it to a development company. I paused, then placed the final document on the podium. "And I own that company." Gasps turned into shouts. Sophie's jaw dropped for the first time, her polished composure cracking. Ethan looked at her, then back at me, his face pale. "Yes," I said firmly. "For years I invested quietly in agricultural technology. I built systems. I held on to shares. I grew something bigger than the soil itself. And when Sophie rushed to sell my land, she sold it to me. On paper, the development belongs to Caldwell Agritech, and Caldwell Agritech belongs to me." Rachel stood from her seat, her voice clear and authoritative. "I've reviewed the contracts. As majority shareholder, Mr. Caldwell has full authority over what happens to this land. That sale is not binding without his approval." The crowd erupted. Some clapped, others shouted their outrage at Ethan and Sophie. I saw neighbors shaking their heads, muttering words like shameful and disgrace. Sophie stood abruptly, her voice sharp and shrill. "This is manipulation. Henry doesn't know what he's saying. He's been confused for months." Before she could continue, Tom Jenkins rose from his seat. "Confused?" "I've seen Henry carry his wife to the truck after a fall. I've seen him in the fields when you two were nowhere to be found. Don't you dare call him confused. You abandoned him. We all saw it. Others joined in. Mrs. Dalton, the pastor, even the mailman, each shouting their piece. The room turned into a chorus of witnesses, their voices drowning out Sophie's objections. I lifted my hand, and the noise slowly quieted. This isn't just about me. It's about the truth. Ethan and Sophie wanted you to believe I was a burden, but burdens don't build legacies. Burdens don't raise sons through drought and debt. Burdens don't turn invention into prosperity. I am not a burden. I am Henry Caldwell, and I am still standing. The applause that followed shook the walls. People rose to their feet, clapping, some even whistling. Ethan sat frozen, his head bowed, shame written across his face. Sophie glared at me with venom, her power crumbling before her eyes. For the first time in months, I felt something stronger than grief coursing through me. Vindication. The farm wasn't lost. Not truly. And the people who had tried to bury me had just been buried themselves. Under the weight of their own lies, the night after the town hall, I sat in my living room in the dark. The echoes of applause still rang in my ears, but so did Ethan's silence and Sophie's venom. For years they had made me feel like a ghost in my own home, a man too old to matter, too weak to fight back. But now the whole town had seen the truth. And once truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. The real battle, though, wasn't over. Public humiliation was only the beginning. Legal consequences had to follow. Rachel called the next morning. Her voice was crisp, professional, but I could hear the satisfaction behind it. "Henry, I've already drafted filings. Fraud, coercion, abuse of power of attorney." "The list is long." "Sophie's fingerprints are all over this," I asked quietly. "And Ethan?" She hesitated. "Legally, he's complicit. He signed documents, he benefited from the money, and he repeated Sophie's words to pressure you. The court won't separate his actions from hers. But morally, that's between you and your son. I hung up the phone and stared out the window at the horizon where my farm used to stretch. The fields were still scarred with survey flags, but now I knew they were mine again, not theirs. I thought of Martha, of her voice urging me to protect what we built, and I thought of Ethan as a boy, running barefoot in the rows, shouting with joy when the first corn sprouted. My heart ached. By the end of the week, the lawsuits hit. The county clerk's office was buzzing. Sophie's name was listed on formal complaints of elder exploitation, fraudulent transfer of property, and professional misconduct. Within days, the State Bar Association launched an investigation into her license. She stormed into Rachel's office, red-faced, her heels slamming against the tile. "This is outrageous! You can't do this to me." Rachel, calm as ever, replied, "I'm not doing anything. Your own actions did this." The following month, Sophie was suspended from practicing law. 2 months later, she was disbarred entirely. Her name, once spoken with admiration at county luncheons, became a punchline whispered with contempt. Ethan's downfall came differently. The hospital board convened a review after Dr. Samuel Green submitted testimony about my capacity during surgery. They listened to recordings I had kept, recordings where Ethan parroted Sophie's accusations of confusion and incompetence. The board found his conduct ethically troubling, using his position as a doctor to manipulate his father's health status for personal gain. He wasn't stripped of his license, but his reputation shattered. Patients canceled appointments. Colleagues avoided him. Dr. Harris, his supervisor, told him bluntly, "Your father is a hero in this town, and you betrayed him." That stain doesn't wash out. One night, weeks after the lawsuits began, Ethan came to my door. He looked smaller somehow, the proud doctor reduced to a man burdened by shame. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot. "Dad," he whispered, "I didn't know it would go this far." Sophie said, I cut him off. Sophie said, "That's all I've heard for years. What about what you said, Ethan? You told me I was confused. You told me to be grateful. You signed away the land your mother cherished." He lowered his head. "I was weak. I let her lead me. And now, I've lost everything." I studied him for a long moment. "You didn't lose everything, son. You still have the chance to face what you did and do something better with what's left of your life. But don't come here asking me to erase it. You wrote it yourself." He left without another word. I watched him walk down the path. His shoulders slumped, and I felt both sorrow and a strange kind of justice. Meanwhile, the land was restored under my authority through Caldwell Agritech. The survey flags came down, equipment was pulled back, and though I knew I couldn't farm like I once had, I set plans in motion to lease the fields to young farmers starting out. With Victor's help, we created a scholarship fund in Martha's name, giving opportunities to kids from families like ours who dreamed of agriculture. The farm would live on, not through Ethan, not through Sophie, but through the community, through those who still understood what it meant to love the soil. One afternoon, I stood at the edge of the property as the wind rustled through the grass. Tom Jenkins joined me, tipping his hat. "Well, Henry, looks like the land's yours again." "Feels right, don't it?" I nodded slowly. "It does. It feels like justice." Justice wasn't loud, I realized. It wasn't always the roar of applause in a town hall. Sometimes it was quiet, the way Sophie's name disappeared from legal circles, the way Ethan's voice faltered when he faced me, the way neighbors waved with respect when they passed by. Justice was the weight lifting from my chest, the knowledge that Martha's promise had been kept. I had lost a son in the process, maybe forever, but I had gained something Ethan and Sophie never understood: peace. The first time I walked the farm again after the lawsuits ended, the land felt both familiar and strange. The fences were scarred with surveyor marks. The barns still carried the ghosts of animals long sold, and weeds had crept into the corners of the fields. But beneath it all, the soil still smelled the same: rich, stubborn, alive. My boots sank into it, and I felt Martha there, as if she had been waiting for me. I leaned on the fence post and closed my eyes. I could almost hear her voice. "Protect what we built, Henry." "Keep it safe," I whispered back. I kept my promise. Of course, I knew I couldn't run the farm the way I once had. My body was weaker now, my back still stiff from surgery. But legacy isn't about clinging to what you can no longer do. It's about ensuring others can carry it forward. With Victor's help, I drew up new contracts. Young families in town who dreamed of farming but lacked land would lease parcels from me at fair rates. Some had children who ran through these fields once, same as Ethan had. Their laughter would bring life back to this place. Rachel finalized the legal framework for the Martha Caldwell Agricultural Scholarship, funded through dividends from my Agritech shares. Each year, students who wanted to study sustainable farming or agricultural science would receive support in Martha's name. Her legacy would not only endure, it would grow. The day we unveiled the scholarship, the town gathered at the old barn. Pastor Reynolds spoke a few words, his voice steady as he recalled Martha's kindness. Neighbors clapped, and I felt a swell of pride, not for myself, but for her. She had given so much to this town, and now her name would continue to give long after I was gone. Ethan wasn't there. He hadn't shown his face much since the lawsuits. Word was he had stepped down from his hospital position and taken a lower-paying job in a distant clinic. His voice trembled the last time he called me. "Dad," he said, "I've lost everything." "No," I answered quietly. "You lost what you chose to throw away." He begged to come back, to help in some way, but I told him the truth. Forgiveness is not something you demand. It's something you earn. If you want to honor your mother, I said, then serve those patients. Learn humility. Until then, I have nothing more to say. Sophie vanished entirely. Rumor had it she moved to another state, trying to start fresh under a different name. But reputations stick like mud on boots. Her arrogance had been her undoing. She would never outrun it. I returned often to the fields, not to plow or harvest, but simply to walk, to feel the soil under my feet, to breathe the air. Sometimes I sat on the porch of the farmhouse, now leased to a young couple with 2 children, and listened to the sound of life filling the rooms again. That was when I realized something important. The land was never really mine to own. It belonged to those who worked it, those who loved it, those who honored it. I had been a steward, nothing more. And now, even in my old age, I was still a steward, passing it along to others who would respect it. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in gold and crimson, I walked to the edge of the property where Martha's rose bushes used to bloom. I carried a small plaque I had ordered, in memory of Martha Caldwell, who loved this land. I fixed it to the fence post myself, my hands steady despite their age. Standing there, I whispered, "We did it, love. They tried to erase us, but we grew stronger. Our son may have lost his way, but your name will never be forgotten. And the land, our land, will live on." The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of soil and grass. For a moment, I felt her beside me, not as the frail woman she had been in her last days, but as the strong partner who once danced with me in the barn, laughing as fireflies flickered outside. I turned back toward the farmhouse, where the lights of the new tenants glowed warmly through the windows. Children's voices rang out, high and bright. Life was here again. That was legacy. As I walked home under the twilight sky, I felt lighter. The burden of betrayal no longer weighed me down. In its place was peace, hard-won, imperfect, but real. Justice had been served. The land was safe. Martha's memory was secure. And I, Henry Caldwell, was no longer just the farmer they once called poor and outdated. I was the keeper of a legacy that would outlast them all.